Good morning and welcome to SHOWstudio, menswear season Spring Summer 2017, and this is our first panel on Paris, and indeed a very exciting one because we're going to discuss a highly anticipated Balenciaga menswear show, which is incredibly exciting because it's the first menswear show in the whole century-long history of a brand, and also only the second show by the newly appointed creative director Demna Gvasalia. So I've got a great set of industry experts joining me this morning. So could you briefly introduce yourself, starting from you, Rory?
Hi, I'm Rory Parnamuni. I am a menswear designer showing in London.
Hello, I'm Natalie Khan and I teach fashion history and theory at Central St. Martin's and London College of Fashion.
Hello, I'm Hetty Judah. I'm a writer. I specialise in art and also fashion sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Anastasiia and I'm chairing menswear panels this season. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I think it's going to be a great discussion. And I mean, for various reasons. First of all, is of course that we're going to discuss the work of Demna Gvasalia, already mentioned, who is a person whose name comes up in literally any discussion you have in fashion this year, last year. You can discuss literally anything without mentioning his name, without mentioning his designs, his approach, his attitudes to contemporary fashion. And also, of course, I think it's interesting to talk about Balenciaga as well, and about the incredible heritage of the brand and how it will translate with today in the contemporary fashion universe. So to start with, actually I wanted to start with talk about a little bit about the new creative director's work, Demna Gvasalia's work. So he started his brand Vetements not so long ago in Paris, and I think he was intending to create something which he thought, or at least, that's what he says, I don't know what he thought, but he said he thought it would be something for quite a small circle of people, quite niche, but somehow it completely blew up and became probably the most symptomatic, most discussed thing in fashion last year, this year. So I don't know, I just wanted to hear your opinion. What do you think? Why this happened? What is it in his work which resonated so much with people?
I think what I find so fascinating, and I teach fashion and I see how my students respond to it, and now, you also had the student panel on Vetements last season, this fascination with sort of moving away from the cult of the designer, which I think, celebrity culture is such an important part of fashion, and sort of more inward-looking sort of approach to fashion. So thinking about fashion as a system and how that lexicon of fashion can be changed, or how the language of fashion can be changed. And that I find, really fascinating. So, as I said, so that it's moving away from celebrity culture, but also establishing a notion of community, that fashion is about belonging to a particular group, and the brand is not just made out of one designer, but it's part of, people coming together and sort of creating that vision of what's behind the brand. And I think that, that is not a new idea, of course, but had this an enormous impact on the industry. And I think that's what I find so interesting about what they're doing right now.
I think they're also drawing together a number of tendencies that have maybe been floating around in the fashion industry for a while. So, on the one hand, there's this idea of the designer as a creator of images, and you have that particularly with Gosha, and he's really pushed that aspect, and he's produced, I think, almost as many books now as he has collections. But so the idea that you're not just creating designs, but you're creating a whole kind of aesthetic universe, a whole aesthetic language. And obviously Eddie Sliman's been doing that now for really quite a long time, since he was at Dior, and I think that's a really important thing that's come through. And then at the same time that they're drawing inspiration from street and youth culture, they're also putting quite a lot of emphasis on quality and the way that they're manufacturing things, and there's quite a lot of, I think, transparency the way they're manufacturing, which again is another big contemporary concern. And then I think, didn't you have an amazing discussion with his brother?
No.
I thought that was at Central St Martin's.
Sarah Moore did a talk with.
Did she?
Yeah.
Okay.
It
And
wasn't me.
because were you present at that?
No, I didn't
You-
go. No,
But I was reading about that, and clearly
no I'm sure it was amazing. Sorry, that sounded like I was like, no, I just didn't.
But also clearly their business approach and their manufacturing approach was really kind of starting from, it's taking a very intelligent look and very informed business look at the way the fashion system's changing, and rather than aping what everybody else is doing, actually taking a really interesting look at the way that you market things, the way you limit the availability. I think the limited availability is really interesting as well.
Yeah, because I think they basically said we have the stockists to stop here now, so we don't.
Yeah.
But I think that's quite a recent thing. So like a couple of seasons ago, they were just selling it, and I think they got to the point where they started seeing people wearing it, and they were like, I don't know if we want him in that hoodie, And now they're saying, okay, cool, each store gets like 5, But it's actually an amazing way to do it, because if you start limiting the stock, then stores can start going, we've only got 5, and they'll literally sell out in a day, and then it's like hype on hype, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're never you never get to the point where your stuff is on sale, because
it's basically like a club, right? You inside is empty, but you don't let anyone in.
Yeah.
At the door. Yeah. But for you as a designer, Rory, do you think? I mean, did it change when you saw like what Vetements do these days? Did it influence your perspective on what you do, or have you noticed among like other designers in London the influence of it?
I don't know. I think it's for me because I don't know what to like 100% believe, because like I've heard different things from different people, and I've heard people say like, oh, before they started Vetements, they did like mad market research where they went out and they found out exactly, like interviewed loads of girls and asked them what they wanted to wear, and actually like found out what people wanted to wear and then just made clothes, But then I have other people saying like, oh, they just started it on a Saturday because they were working jobs at like Louis Vuitton and they hated it, and they just made clothes that they wanted to wear. But I think that's something that actually like resonates really with Vetements, is like they just make stuff. They make stuff that they see people wearing in Paris, and that really comes across that they're not. It's not like this like high concept of like, I don't want to say like a com show, because com shows are amazing, but do you know what I mean? As in, that's very hard to understand, whereas a Vetements show is like leather jackets and shirts, and they're just cool, and that's why people like it, do you know what I mean? Because they can relate to this. And I think that's the same thing that happens with that first season of Balenciaga. Was just like, people just get it because it's just clothes. Do you know what I mean? That market bag that like every kid at Smartens brings to uni because they've got like so much shit. That works because that is what people carry around. Do you know what I mean? They've just done it in a slightly different way, or made it in like a painted leather, and they've like elevated like really normal pieces. And I think that's why people find it so easy to get on board with Vetements.
I think there's sort of a curious duality about the brand which exists, like, and I mean about Demna Gvasalia's work in general, because they started Vetements as like anonymous collective, right? And then suddenly out of it you have probably the most like scandalous, amazing, well discussed personality emerging. So it's really like paradox. And similar, I think, with the way they work with their stuff, is that they say, this is just clothes, this is just product, we're honest with you, we're selling this is all we're about. But then they got the whole kind of the community thing and the like artistic world around it, which is like, it's really not just about clothes.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
No, it's full of contradictions.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why it has sort of moved beyond just the fashion paradigm and has been discussed by people who aren't usually interested in fashion. So, different journalists have picked up on this, or, people who don't really care about fashion are suddenly involved and feel annoyed or fascinated by this brand. And that's always, an enormous sign of success. It doesn't mean that it's great or that it's, doing something that we should all buy into, and a lot of people don't, but at least it resonates. And I think that I think for me is also a sign that the brand is very good at not just looking from the outside in, but looking from the inside out, if that makes sense, and operating in that way and being critical of what they're doing at the same time as creating something that a lot of people just buy into blindly, maybe as well.
Do you think that people, because I find with a lot of things that it's like everyone around a brand over-intellectualizes it. And in Vetements, do you think they really sit there and think about these things? Or do you think they just make clothes,
It doesn't-
and they say,
yeah,
do you know what,
yeah.
like DHL have been messing with us all season. Everything comes in late. It's like annoying the shit out of me. We're gonna like open the show with Gosha in a DHL t-shirt, and then everybody's like, oh, and it means this and it means that, but actually they were just like, it's a t-shirt, and we wanted to do it because we want. Do you know what I mean? I think like it's. I think like a lot of people looking at it can like over analyze and make it like in what's the word I'm looking for? They can like read too much into it when actually they are just making like a really cool boot that is a sock with a lighter as a heel. You know, like
I don't think it matters what they think. I think it, you know, it comes what the customers bring to it, and if they feel they can connect with the brand or the image of what they're doing, even if we're over intellectualized, which obviously I love, you know, then you know, that's fine. That's more than enough. We don't need to ask what their intentions are. Who cares?
I guess the reason it's become quite a heated topic is because I know particularly in Belgium, there's quite a large body of thought that feels that they've lifted quite a lot conceptually from Margiela's early work. And I think then you get the question of how knowingly that's being done, you know, and whether it's an explicit homage to early Margiela collections or whether it's just like a kind of accidental influence or... You know, so I mean, I think that's where the question of intent comes into it a bit.
But isn't that also nostalgia for the late 1990s?
Yeah,
Isn't
I'm
it
sure.
just,
Yeah.
and that is something that we find in other parts of the fashion
Yeah,
industry
I
as
think-
well.
I
And
think-
so just referencing, yes, of
Definitely.
course, there's the biography of the designer and his experience and how he developed and where he was, you know, trained in a way. But I also think it's a stylistic thing that a lot of brands are turning to that period.
Yeah, I think the Margiela topic is like a huge one when it comes to discussing Demna Gvasalia's work, and I think he actually responded to that in one of his interviews, saying that basically the brand discussing the way of Constance's relation to Margiela is just the result of his subconscious nostalgia, because Margiela doesn't exist anymore. So it's nostalgia for something which existed 25 years ago and doesn't exist anymore. So, and I think it's even more interesting considering he is working at Balenciaga now because of this mad circle of influence, and Margiela was influenced by Balenciaga, and now the person influenced by Margiela and ends up as a creative director of a brand. And I actually wanted to ask you, Hattie, about this because you are one of the authors of the great book Fashion Game Changers, which kind of looks at the influence of Balenciaga on many designs in the 20th century. So what do you think of this kind of circle of influence?
I think it's really interesting. And I also love the fact that this first collection he did for Balenciaga we're seeing just now is referencing that the kind of the early century kind of couture photographs with the kind of that jutting hip model pose.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that's really notable in both the work of Balenciaga and in Margiela is that they're people that continue to revisit the same silhouettes throughout their career. So essentially, I mean, in the post-war years, Balenciaga developed a number of shapes that he continued to reinterpret right through to the end of his time at the house. So and those were going quite against what was at that point the dominant fashion. So at the same year, in the same year that Dior brought out the new look, which was essentially going back to that 19th century corseted figure and very restrictive body shape. Balenciaga was looking at these barrel-lined sack dresses that were very freeing and releasing. And he kept abstracting the body more and more and more over the course of his career. And you can also see Margiela taking that very abstract approach to the body, where he's taking something like a trench coat and playing with the volumes and playing with the shoulder lines and the necks and this kind of thing. And really taking a garment to something that's got quite an abstract relationship to the body. And you can certainly see that through line coming actually with the way that Gvasalia kind of approached that first Balenciaga collection, and the way that he uses quite extreme volumes and oversized garments. And I think it's actually really lovely the way that you look at something like those necklines that he's creating with the outsized coats, and how that really references kind of 1950s couture garments, but with a very modern take. It's quite. I think it's quite clever actually.
Yeah, but can I also see Margiela's influence in his?
Yes, I mean,
Balenciaga,
yes,
definitely.
yeah, absolutely, unquestioningly, yeah.
Yeah. Do you, as a fashion historian, Natalie, do you agree that kind of margiela here is a big influence.
Absolutely. No, I think that obviously we're also seeing a shift of what luxury means as well. So for Balenciaga, who, you know, informed what Paris couture was, and, you know, and as you say, Hetty, you know, really challenged and liberated, you know, what garments can be, and liberating the body and focusing on different shapes. So I think that's really interesting. But then the house closed in 1968. And at the time of the student movement in Paris, and that sort of, I think, was also an indication of, you know, what couture meant, you know, to the customers, what it meant to French culture, and I think it's interesting now, as you say, the influence and the referencing of Balenciaga, the couture house, but with the kind of garments that we would describe as everyday objects, like just a jacket or just a jeans jacket, or if it's a puffer jacket or whatever it is that we're looking at. So couture, of course, means something completely different now. And I think, again, that shift is really interesting. And sort of carrying on the tradition, I think, what Balenciaga means, but I think that's also fascinating now that we're looking at menswear today and not women's wear.
How long has Balenciaga been doing menswear as part of its? I mean, I know this is the first show, but
Nicolas Gasquier was doing menswear when he was there.
Right,
So I think it's quite well. They do like a small little presentation in Paris, not models, rails and stuff. So it's been going quite a long time, but they've never done a show. Even though I read somewhere that when Alexandre Wang was doing it, the collections were like massive. Like there was like 10 rails and like really, really big. But I think it never really worked because you always had like some corporate girl PR office like taking you through collections and being like, oh, this is a nice jacket. You know, there was never it was never like a show. There was never like a designer there like showing it. You know, I mean, I don't 100% know that Alexandre Wang wasn't in the room, but do you know what I mean? That's why I don't know.
Well, I mean, from the confidence of the interim menswear collection, you get the feeling that it was maybe done by the team anyway, rather than.
But it was.
Yeah.
So that menswear collection that we've seen that's shot was done in the style of Demna by the Balenciaga team. I think Demna was like consulting on it, but he didn't physically design it.
Yeah. But I thought it was quite a confident collection. Yeah,
it's
I rather liked it.
Yeah, it's shot really nicely on this, like on this like dark background, and kind of like it's really cool.
So why do you think he made this move in the first place to a show to attract so much attention?
Do you know what I mean? Like Balenciaga, if he's going to go in there and change anything, he's got to be like, I'm doing a show for men's, I'm doing a show for women's. Like, I think it just needed it.
Well, I mean, I think
the menswear schedule's really, really boring in Paris as well, because like Raf and Gosha were both doing Pity, so it especially made sense this season to do it and to open as well.
But I think also the thing we were talking about earlier about image creation being so important to the way that he works as well. So I mean, you've got a really limited availability to create a kind of a myth or a sentiment around a collection unless you're either shooting it extremely well before people see it, or you're doing a show as well.
But I also think that menswear generally has become so much more interesting.
Yeah,
and
certainly true.
Yeah, so I think there's so much that we've seen in women's wear that might surprise us or doesn't surprise us anymore. But menswear is so good at challenging sort of this idea of masculinity through dressing, and so I think it makes perfect sense to really focus on menswear now for any brand. And to make that, part of the presentation and something, the images that we create around it, the look, the idea, or the attitude. I think to me, menswear is much more about attitude these days than women's wear is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a great move in terms of starting from a blank page, It's like, it has never been done before, so...
he's like designing a whole thing. He's like, this is the boy, this is the girl, like, that's it. It also makes sense, like, sales-wise, because men's comes earlier, they can, like, do their showroom with like women's and men's. I'd like to know how many women's looks are going to be in the men's show as well. As usual, it always is.
And I mean, of course, if you look at Vetements, it's like in the way of consumer. I guess he doesn't really. I mean, he doesn't really make my distinction in terms of who buys it, because hoodie is like the one of the signature items. It's like
goes back to again this idea of it just being clothes.
Yeah.
Like, give a shit who wears it. It's like the hoodie is cool. Boys wear it, girls wear it. And I think that's also like a big thing. I think that's a big thing on why a lot of people buy it as well, because a lot of girls like buy menswear. A lot of girls wear menswear, but like they go into the men's section in shops and buy it, and like I think that's like part of the appeal, is that like super boysy, like men's shapes on girls.
So what do you think in general about the decision of appointing Demna Gvasalia a creative director of Balenciaga? Do you think this is something which is going to work? Do you think it was done for the hype? Do you think, I don't know, basically just wondered what was your take on it?
I kind of see quite an interesting parallel again with Margiela, because he spent, I think, 6 years as the creative director of Hermes, and he did quite a different body of work from his kind of signature Margiela collections and his more conceptual stuff. So he took, his deep understanding of tailoring and a lot of that kind of suiting heritage and put that into like quite a different vision. I think what's going to be interesting is to see how far he manages to separate what he's doing with vetements from what he's doing with Balenciaga. If he's clever, he'll really separate them, because then he'll have a really personal calling card, but also show people that he has the ability to be quite flexible and to have, a kind of a range, an aesthetic range and a technical range.
I think like what happened to Nicolas Gassier when he was in the last like 5 years when he was at Balenciaga was no one could tell the difference between what he stylistically was and what was Balenciaga, and he left being like, I don't like Balenciaga has almost become Nicolas Gassier. I don't know like where. Like I've read an interview with him, I think it's in System, where he's like, I don't want that just to be me as a designer. And I think, it was maybe 15 years is a bit too long to be at one brand, but he kind of got to a point where they were so inextricably linked that he had to leave almost,
Was it I'm sorry, my brain's a bit fuzzy, but was it he that specifically left because the relationship between what he was putting on the catwalk and what was ending up being produced was completely
I think it's in that
off-kilter?
System interview, he's like, I wanted to do all these interesting things, and Balenciaga were like, no, like he was like, oh, this jacket took us like 3 weeks to come up with the pattern. It's really complex, and then that trickles down to the leather jacket, the like biker that always sells, And he was like, we need to do that to get to this, and they were like, hurry up, like we're not going to put that one in the showroom, we're not going to put that one in like that can go on the show, cool, but we're not selling it. And he was like, what's the point, like he didn't. I think it was getting too like corporate and businessy, and I think through like talks, there's like one bit where he says he wanted to open this amazing store. It was in this like huge industrial space, and Balenciaga, it just took like 6 months for them to even get through like corporate nonsense, and he was just like, I'm done,
I mean, do you think cynically then it makes sense for them to keep approaching younger and younger designers because they're going to be less
but I don't think Demna's any less.
Yeah.
I think that he's probably more. I think like as a young designer, you would go in there really
Right.
headstrong and be like, I'm gonna like make them like. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. Like I think if you approach someone if you approached like Albert and said like, oh, will you come and do it? And he'd be like, okay, cool. I know what it's like to work with a corporate team. I know what it's like to have to get through all that like paperwork and nonsense. But if I went in, I'd be like, no, absolutely not. We're doing this, and probably wouldn't compromise on it, because I'm no worse off if they fired me the day I started. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's what Demna's trying to.
But he has the experience. He was at Louis Vuitton as well. Wasn't
Yeah,
he?
but very different to be like a creative director and to
Yes.
just be like head of a design team. A design team is like protected by a creative
But
director.
Alexander Wang didn't have that experience, so maybe that, that's why he just wasn't the right fit and was only there for such a short time.
Yeah.
Do you think what he... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, do you think what Alexander Wang did, do you think it worked for the brand or not? Just from your personal perspective.
That last show was like, I don't know about the clothes, but the show was really cool. It was like all white. They had this big like not swimming pool, but like pond thing in the middle. The soundtrack was amazing. I didn't really look at the clothes, but maybe that's
yeah,
the
maybe
problem.
that's it. Maybe that's the reason, because I mean, I looked at I think the first two shows, and then it's just like.
I bet it sold though. I bet it sold like crazy.
Yeah, probably. But it's like the viewer, I think, has a really short attention span, and it's like if you're not that interested, basically, the middle ground, the boredom is death for a large fashion house
The middle
these
ground,
days.
that's true. Yeah, but I think also that there is we talked about business and sort of the aspect of the corporate aspect, and I think, you know, the revenues, I mean, I had a look at the figures, but I think it's around 393 million dollars. I think the figure I got was in dollars.
But this is still on Alexander Wang's.
Yes, that was Alexander Wang, and I think that the focus, you know, the focus is of course also on accessories. There's such an important and large slice of that business, and I think Alexander Wang developed really well on that aspect of the business, and that's something, you know, that I don't really associate with Demna so much. So it'd be interesting how they continue to grow the accessories business with his.
It was like in that last Balenciaga show, all of the accessories were amazing. Like he like ended with like 10 bag, and like if you like even the shoes, like not these, but there's like those blue ones with the thing on it. So good. And like the big shoes with the massive thing, they're going to sell like crazy. These boots with the like slanted heel. Yeah, well, I think all of the accessories are going to be like really, really good, you know. And there's like little bags that they're holding as well. Like this one with the blue jacket's got little. I don't know if there's close-ups on Now Fashion, but But I think the accessories were great. And like more interesting. Like if you look at the ones in that white collection, that Alexander Wang collection, they're like bum bags. It's like great.
Yeah, it was quite youth inflected, all of his collections, which is quite difficult for a brand with a very high price.
It works for Alexander Wang in New York, where he's selling slightly cheaper, and girls in New York wear a bum bag, and it's like young and it's cool. But I don't know if Balenciaga, if that like works as much.
But I feel that first Demna show, it was a lot about his first Balenciaga show was a lot about sort of subverting the luxury, you know, because it had this like huge jacket, which kind of looks like it's an almost a parka jacket, like, and if you think how much it's gonna cost, like, then it basically comes to the point who's gonna buy the jacket, how it's gonna look. But then they had also those shoes you mentioned, which has like this really glittering bit, which was quite
like huge
elaborate,
thing.
Which was in a way almost making fun of what luxury is, like a lot of sparkly stuff, you know, arranged in a curious way. So I don't know, what do you think in general about the luxury market these days, about the idea of luxury in fashion today? Is it shifting a lot?
I think it's such an important question. I think it's something that we discuss. I'm part of the luxury research group at Winchester School of Art, for example, and it's completely shifting, you know, of what luxury means. But that also, I think there's a big difference about what luxury means in sort of urban settings and outside of those. And I think there's still sort of outdated ideas, but I think we're really moving on in the big sort of fashion capitals of the world, especially, you know, what we see now with young and up-and-coming designers. They're constantly questioning, and Demna's not the only one, they're constantly questioning of the idea of luxury, and in some ways it's just dead, it's finished, and we have to rethink it completely.
But is there also a feeling that sector of the market is actually now really overpopulated because everybody angled themselves at just at selling to the few very, very, very wealthy customers, but it's just ended up really top heavy.
Yeah.
And that people are very then dependent on selling things at reduced prices and sales and things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's probably true.
But I think as well the customer's changed. I think in the last like 20, 30 years, young people have become way, I'm not saying like richer, but way more interested in actually spending money on clothes. And I think like if you look at Dover Street Market, their customer is not a 50-year-old Russian woman going in to buy like Lanvin. I mean, it is, she exists for sure, but it's also like the 23-year-old St. Martin's kids that want to go in and they've saved up money or they've got a student loan and they want to like buy stuff, you know? And I think, when your customer changes, the idea of what luxury is changes as well, because a 25-year-old doesn't want to buy like those shoes in that collection with the sparkly thing on them, cool, but like girls aren't going to walk around St. Martin's in them, are they? But they are probably going to like buy that.
They are.
I think like maybe the like high slanted boot, but I don't think they're wearing those like little Swarovski shoes. They're a bit mad. I mean, they're amazing. I love them, but still.
Have you already spotted them?
I think I don't know. There's nothing I haven't spotted.
Yeah.
Let's say it that way. I can't pick out a particular item, but yes, there's no limit to what students spend and what they wear.
Do you know what I mean? And if students now have got the money to be buying clothes, then the idea of luxury does need to be redefined. Because I think if you look at Balenciaga when he was making clothes, they were like incredible, but they were for like Jackie Kennedy, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was like so specific. And now, if a 20-year-old's got money to go and buy a hoodie and they want to spend 250 quid in it, why not, right? It's just just need to change what the idea of.
I mean, 250 quid, unfortunately, these days, you know, and it's tragic, but that's quite at the lower end of the price point.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Particularly for women's wear. I mean, it's more like 2,500. It's, you know, it's. I don't know what the prices are for Balenciaga, but I imagine they're kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, for a coat, they're going to be floating around four figures. But I think also with Balenciaga, you know, he was operating in an era where what he did filtered down to, you know, to local seamstresses, to, you know, it wasn't the high street then, but, you know, people would be wearing interpretations of the kinds of silhouettes he was creating. And so I guess with this as well, are these then going to be styles that are filtering down quite a bit? I mean, I think it's a strong enough look that potentially, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I mean, something that you notice with the approach to luxury as well is that these garments don't have to have a crisp or new feel. They always have this used or already worn or something that is old or even, you know, secondhand in some way. And I think that also has a great effect on how we don't need to wear it now, and it doesn't have to be current, and it doesn't have to look new. Again, I think, you know, that's something that defines, you know, a lot of what designers are producing.
But it's also quite interestingly democratic, because it's also then becomes so much about the way you style yourself and less about what you're spending the money on.
Yeah.
You know, so you can walk down the street and see a girl in a pair of high-waisted snow-washed jeans or, you know, and white sneakers, and you don't know whether they're actually, you know, £14 ones that she's had in the back of the wardrobe forever, or she's gone out and bought some quite expensive look from an up-and-coming designer or whatever. It's actually kind of quite hard to make that distinction now.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you don't combine it with a Michael Kors bag, I think.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things about Vetman was that they kept stressing that they're about the attitude. They're not actually about going and buying that hoodie. If you buy that hoodie, that doesn't mean you belong to a club. You belong to a club if you're cool, if you do. So, and I mean, I think even Demna Gvasalia himself said that he wouldn't buy this stuff for the price, and his friends can't buy the stuff for the price it's sold. So it's, again, it's kind of weird paradox.
But does that then mean that you kind of go and buy a massive outsized Parker and wear it, you know, off the shoulders and style it like that?
Sort of. And then why not? Why really? It seems like people, basically, if you're cool enough, you can just do it yourself, come to CD yourself rather than borrow it from someone. Maybe I'm also interested in and what I think generated quite a lot of discussion is that Demna Gvasalia's work went from sort of disrupting the fashion system, you know, the whole Vetman thing was a reaction against the industry, was all about what he didn't like about the industry and wanted to challenge, and then he sort of went to work in Balenciaga, which is pretty much meaning coming back right there and working as part of it. So what do you think of it? Do you genuinely think his stuff about disruption of fashion system, do you think it's genuine? Do you think it's possible? Do you think it's needed? Do you think he means it when you speak about it?
I don't really know what, I think again we overanalyze this thing of what, because I don't actually know 100% what he said about disrupting the industry, but as in, to me, Balenciaga fits very nicely into a little Vetman fits quite nicely into a little fashion box. I mean, they show every season, they do a showroom, it sells in stores, it gets delivered. Do you know what I mean? It's it still works the exact same way. I think the only way that it was different was that he was I don't want to work at Louis Vuitton anymore, and I want to do my own thing, and I want to do exactly how I want to do it, and I want to work with all of these people, and I want to work with Lotta, who's my friend, and do you know what I mean? It's I think that I don't really know how it is.
So I think the key change was that he did. Oh, actually, we got the show live, so I guess we have to stop this for a second and look at the show. It's a really good stream compared to the last one.
A nice natural light as well.
Yeah, very, very great location, isn't it? And quite a lot of people there.
Oh, we've got the Patrick Cox 1990s snakeskin boots.
Yeah.
Well, talking about nostalgia.
Yeah.
The boots are cool. That's sort of
That's-
really him, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's a really interesting silhouette there. And the box-shaped sort of jacket sort of reminds me also of Pierre Cardin and that kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, I think he always kind of kept saying, Demna's always kept saying that he's interested in making clothes which changes the way you feel, the way you move, the way you walk. And I think it's sort of quite visible.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's got this like boxy shape, but then he's got really like tight, sort of tailored stuff, which is sort of sort of all around the waist, really sort of not usual for men.
But to me, there's sort of a real sense of referencing of designers of Paris fashion that was influenced by youth culture in some ways. And I think that's really interesting, and that had such an enormous impact on the way that fashion became relevant again. And I think it's about sort of this idea of relevance and attitude, and that, yeah, as you say, Anastasiia, that wearing them gives you a particular kind of attitude.
And it's also really interesting to see how differently it's making the models walk.
Yes.
Depending on whether they're on one of those like really planar, stiff, almost two-dimensional leather coats, or in one of the kind of blousier kind of numbers.
It kind of looks like fabulous old pervert, right? It's quite like Park Flasher. Like.
The chain is good.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in this kind of context
it's kind
in
of
a long
cool
time.
that it's elaborated into something like
Yes.
a luxury item, such
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
really
it's
mundane,
clever.
silly thing, really sort of intricate, and a huge
A
bag.
nice
Here's the
IKEA bag.
Yeah, it is actually.
It really is an
I like
IKEA bag,
it.
actually, isn't it? You're completely right.
But again, I think that's that thing. Like people do. Like I have to carry around an IKEA bag all the time because it's just like can't get anything as big as it. So it's like he must have seen, like must just see people on the street doing it and.
I really like the way the watch chain hardens up the overall look as well,
Yeah.
because that could have been quite a kind of soft look, but suddenly having all of that metal hanging off gives it quite a different tone. Yeah, he's done the other one in yellow, so I think you're spot on in that. It's funny, I was looking at those Al Vandenberg photographs of the 70s and 80s, and that kind of TED revival of the 80s. It's quite 1980s TED revival.
Yeah.
Like the really exaggerated kind of high-waisted pleats and raised shoes as well.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's again sort of mixing a lot of different subcultural looks, a lot of different details from here and there, from those amazing old photographs from like the 80s. Which
But the focus on suits overall, I think, is really interesting. Why? How do... I mean, it also reminds me, maybe that's a silly reference here, but it also reminds me of the Beatles in some way, because they wore suits on stage and then made it part of youth culture again.
Yeah, so in a way it's good to see that, considering that these days we talk about like tracksuit a lot, we talk about more like sportswear looks and stuff. Good to see that he's doing the exact opposite of that, but which in a way plays in a similar, plays in a kind of similar trend. It's kind of funny like lacy bit.
It's funny enough, they had aprons in the interim menswear collection, and they had leather aprons, so it's almost like the lacy apron coming from underneath.
Really
From butcher to baker.
But he's a tea-shop lady. But those outsized coats are sitting really, really nicely as well. I think to get that volume sitting really, really snugly as you're moving like that is, there's some nice cutting going on. And those incredibly snug kind of little Bob Dylan
Yes.
double-breasted suits as well. You know, they're actually, the sleeve actually is starting kind of there. It's not even.
Yeah.
What do you think about the casting? Because the casting obviously is quite a big thing for him always. I think it's quite interesting looking.
Yeah, and again, it really goes into that, like, lots of different youth subcultures as well.
But to me, the casting is, I mean, it's about this hyper individualization, isn't it? It's something that every face is so unique that it it's something in its own way. And, or everybody, it's not, I mean, it's all of it obviously coming together.
But very white as well.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Very white, very European looking.
Kind of interesting.
And then with the music.
Kind of like almost like a
is it a
priest,
yeah.
like has really vibes of the Orthodox priest thing, this scarf. And corresponds to the sound actually, it's good, kind of really churchy sound. Yeah, with the all white cast, I mean, they had lots of critique about it from the first Balenciaga show. I mean, what sort of Demna Gvasalia said in response is that I don't want to tick the box with one black model just because I have to, which is in a way true. I mean, it doesn't mean he's right, but it's like, in a way it's true, it's like really hypocritical, this whole thing. That you put one black model in the show and it's fine then.
But why not then just put 10?
Yeah. I know. No, there is really no excuse. But have we missed? Is it really all white?
No, there's like. But then but I suppose this is now for Balenciaga. Balenciaga said we can't have that kind of press. The same thing we had last season,
But we have, obviously, it's rooted in Christianity. I mean, we're seeing this now with the music. And that's a cultural reference, I guess, that's running through the show now, and that is white. Don't you think?
Christianity is white.
Well, no, the way that there is a very problematic history, I guess, of the way that Christianity is seen as something that is pure, that it cleanses, that is about colonialization. Yes, that's a message you can get from that.
Certainly problematic.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about luxury, and I think he did manage to create something that felt both quite fresh and quite luxurious there.
Yes.
Right, that was great. So, what do you think? What do you thought?
Yeah, I thought it was cool actually. There was like bits in it that was a bit funny, like that purple brocade look with a like zip up top was a bit weird, but I thought like loads of the coats looked cool. The tailoring was great. It actually made like a big gap between like vetements and Balenciaga, especially in menswear. Yeah. There isn't one hoodie.
Yeah, there is actually no...
There's no sportswear. There's barely any stretch fabric. Yeah. There's some great like knitwear bits that were like really tight, which again goes against vetements stuff.
Which I think is interesting because he did precisely that. He did not what people would expect of him, which is, I think, a great thing. Because, seeing in effect something which is absolutely the opposite of Batman is great. And I think it's really kind of rhymes with... goes well together with the fact that he said in his interviews that it's just his chance to work with luxury, while Batman is kind of, it's not really about exclusive, glamorous and stuff. It's kind of the opposite of that. So yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see if that influences the way people dress.
I think like it already looks like the way people dress. I think that's why vetements and this is like the stuff that Demna does is always relevant, is because like that actually is like that little snakeskin boot with a stacked heel. I see like every day, and like a cropped little flare trouser I see all the time. Like it is how people dress like right now.
So it's tapping into its zeitgeist that already exists.
Yeah, like I think as well if you look at the way he does his like I think. And I don't know, but I've read in like a couple of different places that the way they do their research is like a lot of it's just like looking at people on Instagram, looking at like Pinterest, looking at like just loads of people wearing clothes, like real clothes. And I think that's, you can really see that in the way that collection looks and how Vetements looks too.
What do you think, Heidi? What was your thoughts on it?
No, I mean, I like, there are all kinds of bits of it I like there, and I think it's also that interesting thing when Rory picks up on the kind of the ugly aspects, that sometimes it's the ugly aspects that end up being the kind of strongest things overall. And that's where when something seems really ugly and wrong, that actually ends up being the kind of fresh thing, doesn't it? That the things that we're liking, as you say, they're probably things that we are drawn to because we're quite used to seeing them already. But I think the very extreme double-breasted long coats I thought were really good, and I can see that being something that's carried across. That's not something I feel that I'm seeing actually. And that was with the very, very tight shoulder cut.
But in a way, you mentioned the ugly. You both mentioned the ugly aspects. I think like people talk quite a lot about the ugly, and it's sort of, there's no ugly is new beautiful and stuff. But I think it's pretty much almost always been like that in fashion.
Yeah.
That borrowing from the ugly is how it actually works. Because this is what it's challenging. So yeah. But do you think he sort of played on that quite a lot? Use stuff which kind of is seemingly just like strange, and
I think it's a real departure from Alexander Wang's menswear line, isn't it? I mean, it's
completely.
It really, he has found his own sort of take on, where he wants to take, and we were talking about that earlier, of where he wants to take that part of the business. I think that's a really strong. There's some really strong pieces that I think stand out for me as something that I haven't seen anywhere else. I mean, I know you were saying he's picking up what is around and what you see on Instagram, but I can't.
I don't mean from design. I don't mean from
a
designers.
design perspective.
I mean
yes,
from like
absolutely.
Like hanging around in places in Paris where like kids hang around and taking pictures of them, or they're not hanging around at St. Martin's. But you know what I mean? Like lots of designers do that. Like Paul Smith used to hang around in Camden, just taking pictures of people or drawing stuff. Do you know what I mean?
No, there's definitely. I mean, there's obviously a really, really strong vintage clothing elements to this, and a lot of this is, adaptive. It looks like it could be adaptive reuse of a suit that you pick up in a vintage store. Or,
Again, I think it and I don't want to like call anyone because I don't know their design process, but I think a lot of it, I think they do buy a lot of vintage stuff and they do like take it apart and play with the patterns, but I think that's like a really relevant way to design. It works then, like why not rework it and use it again?
Those shorts with the boots are interesting in look 3. I thought that first I didn't realise that is not trousers being cut in half, but that's a leather boot. That's
quite cool.
That's a great look.
Yeah. I think in a way it's really, I mean, it's really hard to sort of say, I mean, talk about challenging the menswear and masculinity, but in a way, if you, I mean, take the average menswear look, you wouldn't necessarily see, high knee boots and cropped trousers and like heels on every second person. So it's, to me, it's kind of like a very nice touch to, basically talking about something androgynous, something unconventionally masculine, but without the, all the stereotypical things. Because I think shoes as well, it's really like changes the way you move, it changes the way you present yourself. So it's interesting to see him taking it a bit to like a strange direction with the boots.
It feels quite like trend aware. Do you know what I mean? Feels quite like I think if you put those boots in the Gucci show 2 days ago, you wouldn't have been like, they're weird. Do you know what I mean? I think like also some of the jackets and things feels quite like 70s. Feels quite like, and I don't hate to be like on trend because that's horrible. But do you know what I mean? It fits within what's happening.
Do you mean like the 70s? So
There's like this. And again, it looked like I don't like look at trends. I don't really understand it, but like there is like a 70s vibe happening.
Yeah, definitely. But in a way that looks really, really contemporary. That this is a reinvention of that. While when you look at Gucci, I think it's pretty much. I mean, do you really see something very new? I mean, I don't know. I doubt that. What do you think if you compare those two?
I think this feels like way fresher. This has like scope to move on. This can like, and then this is bad, and I like. But sometimes with Gucci, I think like, where do you go from here? Like, this is super vintage, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Like, how does this go anyway? But then this feels like a lot like fresher. Like it can move on from here. There's like I think it's like actually like a great base, like a great starting point. Quite a good first men's collection for sure.
I was a bit
Lots of
surprised
stuff I actually
about
want to wear, you know.
all those baseball hats. What do we think about those? What do you think about white men in baseball caps?
Specifically white men in baseball
Well,
caps,
I
or-
don't.
It is like, of course, plays into the stereotype of a kind of faggish.
Yeah, it kind of looks
Guy.
like 70s truck driver American.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with like this idea of like Americana. and-
Yeah, but also like the
Wow.
chain basically comes from the same.
Yeah.
Comes from sort of the same source, doesn't it? The stuff really. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like. To me, when I saw the hats, I felt like about business perspective first of all,
Okay,
because it's
yeah.
because it's sell well, because it's like it's literally like you know, any skater brand these days
Yes,
sells
that's right.
hundreds of baseball
Yes.
caps with just say the name of a brand on them.
Is that
So
what it says? You think?
I
on
think
the
it says
name?
Balenciaga on them.
On the-
doesn't
yeah.
it?
Because I mean, look,
So-
number 15 is so sellable from absolutely
Yeah.
top to toe. That's
Yes,
such an easy
yes.
look, but it's also got an attitude to it, even though it does look a bit like a man taking his laundry out to clean it.
Yeah. But then I just think as well, like a lot of it looks like how you'd actually wear it. And
Yeah.
I think that's where Demna and Lotte work amazingly well together. That they're just like, oh no, like just put a hat on it, or like, do you know what I mean? Like I think they work really closely with fit model, and they'll just be like making looks in a very like natural way, and they do feel like that. They do look like looks that you'd wear in the way you'd wear them.
So do you think styling here is an important?
I think with all of it
Yeah.
and this
Yeah.
and Balenciaga.
So yeah,
really
because
is.
Demna works with a lot of Volker quite a lot, and I think she consults him as well.
Mhm.
On
I think it's super
designing,
important for all designers. It's like a stylist is like the second hand. Do you know what I mean? It's like the most. I think it's like second to designing physical clothes. Your stylist is like the most important person. Like Jada Anderson and Benjamin Bruno,
Yeah.
match made in heaven. And same with these two. You know.
So do you see her work a lot in this when you look at the show?
I think that they're like too linked to even be able to tell which is which. Like if you look at Vetements, you can't be like, oh, that part's done and that part's Lotte. You're like, it just is what it like. The way they work together must be. I think they must be like best friends. You know what I mean? And they just like it's not really like a super worky relationship. It's not like, oh, make an appointment. Like
But
I think
that-
she's just
yeah.
around and they just have a nice time.
I think that's really interesting, and I think we see that so much more, isn't it? Again, we talked about that earlier. We touched on that sense of community, and this is about people working together. But that also sort of plays back to this idea that sort of we're veiling identity now, isn't it? We're covering it up in some way. So it's not about the cult of one individual, but it's the cult of the team and what they stand for. And that then becomes, obviously, there's so much discussion about that, you know, how valuable anonymity is these days, and that itself has become a luxury. So we're now looking at a luxury brand that is veiling identity through working as a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a positive trend to me. You know, the whole community vibes, which a lot of designers I feel really stress the point that it's not about me, it's about the community. And here, this kind of whole subcultural things come in really interestingly, because in a way you create your own subculture, you know, from all the bits from other ones.
I think as well, it's like funny to like say team and to be like, oh, they're all like collaborators. It's like they're just mates. Do you know what I mean? And they like hang around in the studio together. They're probably like drinking beers and hang around in the studio, being like doing looks the night before the show, and they're having a really good time. And it's not like worky. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's how a lot of people work, especially with like. It's like Demna and Lotte, and then like Paul, who's in the show, is a model. I'm sure like he probably does looks with them, and like they're all friends, and they all go out together, and the whole team at Vetements would all be friends. So it's like I just don't know if it's as like team work like that. Like I think that makes.
But it's so
makes
much
for
more
us.
healthy. I mean, you
Yeah,
know, we were talking
100%.
about the kind of, you know, the celebrity aspect of designing and this kind of thing. I mean, the number of people that have burnt out or been profoundly miserable and felt very isolated, and you know, possibly without deliberately having done lots of field research as an approach to the business. It's a much more sustainable way from an intellectual perspective of proceeding.
It also just makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I don't want to be surrounded by annoying people all day. I'll just get all my friends in. My friend who is a stylist, my friend who is a model, just doesn't. Why would you? Why would you?
We also
But
understand
you're
each other's
bringing them in?
Yeah.
Do you bring them in, or do they then also, because obviously here the team, they have their own voice, they have their own image, they have their Instagram feeds that everybody looks at. Is that something that you consider as well with your work then, that your stylists then become creators in their own way?
Well, I think it's that thing, like, you as a designer, and if you're working with a stylist and they're your mate, like, everything they do that's good is good for you. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you don't think about it like that because they're just your friend. But I don't like if your stylist is doing, like, Lotta's now. She's with Man About Town as well. I can't remember her exact role. It's fashion editor at large, something, I think. But yeah, like that's amazing for Demna.
Yes,
how is
absolutely.
it not?
Yes.
And also he's probably like, well done you, because that's an amazing job and you're my mate. Like, I don't think there's this thing where it's like, I don't think it's controlled and like that. I think it's just people making clothes, and
So
as they get more successful, that's great. Like,
yeah, so coming back to the show, does it look Balenciaga to you when you look at it?
I mean, it's a menswear collection. He never designed
Yeah, he
menswear.
never
So
designed
Well, yeah, I mean,
but it feels like luxury, and it feels quite like Paris and luxury. And if it was hanging in a Balenciaga store, I don't think I'd be like, what's that? You know?
it's got a point of view,
Yeah.
and it feels like it's really beautifully made.
Mm-hmm.
Would Balenciaga turn in his grave today?
Well, if he owned like 90% of the company, I think he'd be like rubbing his hands
No,
together.
when I was talking to Mirren, who's the kind of great Balenciaga historian, and I kept asking her these things, like, was he inspired by Dada? Was he inspired by this? She's like, all he did was work. He didn't look at the art world. He didn't look at, I clearly did have a sense of humour, and it's just, So I guess the idea of maybe anybody else taking over from what he was doing would seem, he must have seemed pretty strange then, but
yeah, I mean, strange in any case, yeah.
yeah.
No, but just more, maybe not as a relation to personality, but more as a relation to the brand, and I mean, what it stands for. Do you think it fits that?
Brands in Paris changed. Nicolas Gasquet, Louis Vuitton is like miles away from what Marc Jacobs did.
Yeah.
So what is the identity of Louis Vuitton? Like, other than a speedy bag in Selfridges, like, what is it? It changes every time a new designer takes over, and that's actually like a really great thing that the industry can not every 6 months, but every 10 years or however, when a creative director changes, we can like embrace a new vision for that brand. Like when Raf started at Dior, and everyone was like, but now Dior is going to be completely different whoever takes it over. And it's like, I think it's great that we all get behind a designer as long as they're doing good work. Do you know what I mean? We're not just like, well, we don't like Dior no matter who's there. It's like, we're behind like people, and I think that's a nice
so
thing.
true, actually.
Does the end consumer know that? Do they follow it as
for
closely
sure.
as we do?
I think all the people who buy Raf's Dior, depending on who goes there, do you know what I mean? Like, let's say by some wild stroke of imagination that John Galliano comes back, I think all the people who bought it while Raf was there would be like, thanks, like, it's just such different product, And also, like, I am like a mad Raf fan, so when he did Dior Couture collections, I was like, oh my god, they're like so incredible, like the most beautiful things ever. But then I like look back at John Galliano collections and I'm like, not for me. But
Okay.
do you know what I mean? But then I speak to people who like adore Galliano and they're like, don't like Raf. And you're like, okay. But
isn't it with couture a little bit different, because it's about the personal connection you have with the team and the fittings and what the craftsmanship behind the brand. And even if the designer changes and that personalities come and go, and the approach to the brand is maybe completely different, but you still, if you are a Dior Couture client or if you're a Balenciaga Couture client, then
I think couture is harder as well, because couture you don't buy it, do you? You change it. Yeah. So you buy it and then they go, okay, cool, I want that like oligarch's wife from Russia who comes in and buys that Dior jacket from Raf is still going in there and saying, okay, like make it super tight in the waist and put some brooches on it. Like they're getting a very different product, but the shows are like super Raf. But if they're a Dior Couture client, they're coming back and they're buying what they were buying 6 months ago, aren't they? Same thing.
But I think maybe part of what you're saying is the fact that you've got you have these resources available to you when you're doing couture that to a certain extent dictate maybe some of the approaches you're making, whether that's unbelievable work with feathers or pleating or
you have like a brand identity.
So that to an extent is going to sway the way that you're working and designing, because you'll have that in mind. I don't know, it's funny, I wonder whether that idea of the consumer changing with the switching directors is because some of these larger brands have become so dispersed. Because actually, you look at something like Jill Sander, and I don't know whether the Jill Sander consumer would have changed that much, depending on who was designing it. I mean, it's got such a strong
but I think that
niche brand
quite...
identity. But when you take a much larger house and it's a much more dispersed offering.
Because I think with like Jill Sander's like a funny one, and I think the same with Calvin Klein. It's like they have such a brand identity that they will only ever take on a designer who fits that. So like Jill Sander is, I think, like an amazing, like old Jill Sander is like heaven, but it's like, yeah, like Raf worked, but then when Jill came back, like product changes and got a bit funny, and they could only ever really take on someone who is a minimalist, you know. And I think Calvin Klein as well, like Francisco Costa, Calvin Klein was like so perfect what he was doing, because he is like American and super, like he's like, oh, white cotton is like perfect. Do you know what I mean? Like he just fit the brand. But then like bigger brands, like especially brands that are older, I suppose, like Louis Vuitton or Dior and Chanel have all got a changeable identity.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
maybe not,
then you know, that's
but
true.
like they've got like
you
a
know.
changeable identity.
Yeah, I mean, then with Donna Karan, there has been a big shift with public school, isn't there? And there's something so recognizable about Donna's work and what she's done, you know, with the brand for such a long time, and now it's outdated, and public school are changing it completely. So I think, you know, yes, I totally agree with you, but nothing's for certain.
I mean, I guess that's why in a way it's so challenging for these huge brands to find someone who's exactly right, but who's also different. Yeah, and I mean, considering we're kind of running out of time, maybe before we finish, just say a couple of words about the collection as your like final opinion on it. All of you.
Oh, me.
John.
I think it's good. I can't really think of anything that I don't like. I mean, I don't love that like plaid-y fabric, but I think the cut of everything's great. I still stand by that. I think it looks like a bit pervy and older and American, like 70s. I think that's quite cool. I do think like the casting looks very vetements, but is it diverse enough? I don't personally think so, no, but I think it's cool. I like these. I really like these two jackets. The
bomber
MA
jacket.
one flag jacket that he's like puffed up the shoulders on, and this like Crombie beside it's really cool.
No, I think he developed what we associate with him, and there's a return to, I think, a term that we use so much today, and that I'm sure overused as well in our conversation, as attitude. And I think he's brought that back, but he's done something new with it, and I think that's a very, very confident move. So yeah, no, I like it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think it definitely feels like he's, raided some vintage stores for fabric inspiration, for cut inspiration, but then he's also presented some really strong shapes in this as well, which I think probably will become very recognisable and will filter down as well. And I think it's really great that he's distanced his offering for Balenciaga from the vetements aesthetic.
Yeah, certainly.
I think that was quite important, so I'm glad that he's gone for that option.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it would be certainly interesting to see what kind of influence it has on the way people dress. So let's give them a round of applause.